Today, I won't take much more time. I just want to share one thought I've been eager to get to in Psalm 37. So, David, there's a few things that continually come back in this psalm. One is not fretting, not getting worked up, okay? Especially in the context of what evil doers are doing. We are fully aware that we live in a fallen planet that is God resistant for the most part. Now, there are people eager to hear and understand the gospel that would be repentant and responsive as soon as they understand it. That's why we're active and aggressively trying to communicate the gospel. That's the mission of the church. And yet, that is all unfolding in a world that is, frankly, diabolical, right? There's the prince and the power of the air, the father of lies, Satan, who is walking about as a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. So there's no doubt that there's a satanic presence against working against us as believers and against God, okay, and the plan of God. And yet, we're not to be fretting, fearing, or worked up about that satanic presence. I'm going to preach on Sunday the final message in our Fearless series. It's entitled Fearless in Readiness. And we're going to spend some time talking about the return of Jesus and how we're to be always ready, and that every generation of Christians was living in imminence, in the understanding that Jesus could come back at any time. Do we live in a day when the signs seem to be all around us that this could be near? Absolutely. And what should that drive us to? Well, certainly not fretting, not getting worked up, not fighting not fighting against the plan of God, I should say, but being ready, being engaged. So David repeatedly says in the psalm, don't get worked up about the wicked. And then he contrasts. He basically says, delight yourself in the Lord, calm yourself down, commit your way to him, wait patiently for him, rest in him, don't do the wrong thing. So be measured and careful in your responses in a wicked world. And then he contrasts verses 9 and forward, really, the fate of the wicked and the fate of the righteous. And we've talked about broadly what those terms mean. Ultimately, Jesus is the only one who is righteous. It's an interesting read to go back through this and think of every reference to the righteous man as ultimately a reference to Jesus, which would not be inappropriate, okay, because all the scripture points to him. He is the ultimate righteous one, and our righteousness is granted and conferred from him based on our faith. So David contrasts, and he's reminding himself, he's teaching others in his old age that it is always right to follow God. It always pays to follow God. The outcomes of following God are always ultimately good, okay? Even though there's some short-term hardship, short-term brokenness, short-term vulnerability on the part of believers, in the big picture, God always protects and comes through for those who follow him. And one of the things that keeps recurring through the psalm is that the righteous or the meek or those that follow God will ultimately inherit the earth or the land. David keeps coming back to living in the land or inheriting the land. You'll see that theme just repeated all the way through the psalm. And that was, again, in David's day, a big concept because Israel had claimed their land that God had given to them, and they constantly faced the threats of it being taken away, okay? And so what is that? It's a short-term picture of the fact that we are the inheritance of all the vast wealth and resources and riches of God, including a new heaven and a new earth. And that in times like this, we get nervous about our rights being taken away, our Constitution being trampled on, powerful people, what are they going to do to us? What's in the vaccines? What's in this? What's in this plan? Where's it all going? And we can get worked up about this. But again, God calls us to calm responsiveness, to waiting patiently, to faithful, obedient engagement in his will for our lives, to stepping forward in faith. And it constantly reminds us that that we don't need to live in fear. We don't need to live in greed. We don't need to live in in stewing and fretting over our own survival. In fact, we left off yesterday around verse 21. And look at verse 21. The wicked borroweth and payeth not again, but the righteous showeth mercy and giveth. What is he contrasting there? I mean, it almost seems out of place. Like I said yesterday, these sound like Proverbs. And he's talking about that God upholding the upright and their inheritance being forever, verse 18, not being put to shame, verse 19, verse 20, the wicked ultimately perishing, and like quickly, the fat of lambs, they shall be consumed, they'll melt away like fat in a pan, just burning into smoke, okay? Into smoke they shall consume away. They'll just like a vapor, they'll vanish. And then out of nowhere, he says, the wicked borroweth and payeth not again, the righteous showeth mercy and giveth. It seems so out of place, but I think here's what David is drawing the contrast on. The wicked are living greedily. They're hoarders. They are self-centered. They're driven by consuming and getting more for themselves, to the point of borrowing and not even caring about repaying. There's no ethic. There's no character. It's just greed. It's just survival of the fittest. And that was very prominent in David's day. It's very prominent in our day. But then he contrasts that those who are cared for by the Lord, those who are held by him, the righteous, are able to show mercy and to give, to live generously. Why? Because they are held by a generous Father. Their supply is a stream coming from the God who owns it all. So earlier in the psalm, he says, I'll take care of my people even in famine. And then the contrast here is, wow, God's people can be generous even in hard times. But wicked people in a moment of survival are gonna hoard. They're gonna steal. They're gonna borrow and not pay back. And it's a contrast in not just a kind of person, but in a kind of thinking. It's a contrast not in simply behaviors, but in a way of living. Like those who have to scavenge or scour for their own survival are in a bad place because they've rejected God. But those who are trusting and relying on the Lord, they just know, I don't know how, but God's going to keep sustaining me. He's going to keep providing for me. Look at verse 22. For such as be blessed of him shall inherit the earth. He keeps coming back to that phrase. And they that be cursed of him shall be cut off. Now look at verses 23 and 24 for just a moment, and then we'll wrap it up. The steps of a good man are ordered by the Lord. Now, I know I'm not good except by faith. I've been declared good by God through Jesus. Okay, so in that sense, it's not my goodness, it's his goodness, right? But the steps of a good man are, so I'm declared good by faith. You say, I don't feel like a good person. That's not what that's saying, okay? We've already talked about this, but your goodness is granted by grace, okay? You've been declared good. So if you've trusted Christ, you are good in God's sight, okay? You may not be good in your own sight, but you're good in God's sight. And so God, I think, is not only talking about Jesus, but he is talking about you. The steps of a good man are ordered by the Lord, and he delighteth in his way. I love that. The principle of, again, waiting and resting and letting God order my steps in his word, according to his word, and accepting by faith that God, the pronouns here, I'd have to dig really into the Hebrew to find out how the pronouns play out. Is this God delighting in my way, or is this me delighting in God's way? And the likely answer is both, okay? That just the idea that the steps of a good man are ordered by God implies that God takes great delight in my life, in the roadmap forward for my life and my callings, and his will for me, his assignments for me, that God delights in my life. And I think there's a response there that says, once I understand the steps that God unfolds for me, they're going to delight me. It's going to be delightful to be able to step into God's unfolding plan. I could comment on that personally, that this has been a time of strange emotions, of unusual work patterns, of increased stress, for me and for you, It's been a time that's just been like no other time in my life. And yet there are very specific points of delight. Okay. I have delighted in doing these daily devotions with you. I feel like I'm just sitting here rambling, but one wonderful member of our church yesterday wrote me and said, Pastor, the only thing I can think that are like these was when FDR did fireside chats. Now, I wasn't alive when FDR did fireside chats, but I read about them, and I thought they were a great idea for a leader at the time, because it's important that that leaders speak during difficult and unpredictable times. Now, I don't presume or presume to assert myself into that. I have been so encouraged and helped by the fact that our president has been present and available like every day. He's out there in public engaging the media, and it's been prickly with the media. I marvel at some of the silly and foolish questions they ask him. They're clearly not trying to give us information, most of them, the information we need anyway. But I've been amazed at how that his administration is being forth there in the face of the American people, communicating, highly communicative. And I know that's important. It was important for FDR. It's important for pastors and for church families. I've delighted in my family. I've delighted in simple things like sunshine and bike riding and taking walks with Dana. I've delighted in just being able to drive over to Chick-fil-A and sit in my car and eat some chicken nuggets. I've delighted in God's Word. So there have definitely been some delights in just realizing that this time has been a time ordered by God, and the steps that we're taking, He's ordering those steps. And I know that if you've joined me in this journey on these dailies, then you sense that as well, probably in your own life in ways that I don't even fully understand. So the steps of a good man are ordered by the Lord, and He delighteth in His way, and I would echo, His way is delightful. His way has elements of delight to it. Though he shall fall, we'll stop at verse 24. Though he shall fall, he shall not be utterly cast down, for the Lord upholdeth him with His hand. So there's a principle here, and I shared this not long ago with our church family. Someone following God can still trip up, but it's a small fall, not a big fall. Okay, it's a short fall, not an ultimate fall. And what God says is, you can only fall so far. When you're following me, life is bumpy, and you might trip up, but you're not going to be destroyed. You're not going to be devastated. You're not going to be falling too far before you hit solid ground, and you're going to be able to stand up. Because I'm upholding you. You might feel like you're falling, but you're really not. Okay, that's what God's saying. Okay, though he fall, he shall not be utterly cast down. You're falling, but not really. Okay, and that applies to everything in life. You're sorrowful, but not really, because you're ultimately going to be joyful. You're grieving, but not really. We sorrow not as those that have no hope. Right, and there's so many descriptors about life, like we're going through trials, but not really. We feel a loss of hope, but not really. We are in so many ways wondering where God is and what He's doing, but not really. Our faith is the thing that makes the difference, right? So that we fall, but not too far before we bump up against our faith and we realize we're not really falling. Okay. We sorrow or grieve or doubt until we bump up against our faith and the promises of God, and we're like, I'm doubting, but not really. I feel hopeless, but I'm not really hopeless, and that just plays out in every way because underneath all of the temporary falling, doubting, fearing, all the temporary experiences of life, there's this strong promise, enduring hope. That holds us fast. And so that's really what the psalmist is getting at, that God upholds us. So even when we feel like we're falling, we're not really falling. There's a ride at Disney World or Disneyland in California. It's called the Tower of Terror. And it's one of these free-falling like elevator situations. So you go, It's at Hollywood Studios in Disney World. It's one of our favorite rides. You kind of go through a queue and you come into this Twilight Zone kind of situation. And you walk through the queue, and the idea is you're getting on a haunted elevator, right? And you sit down, and all of a sudden you go through this special effect thing, and it locks into a chamber, and it shoots you way up into this tower, and you're sitting there, and then it jolts, and then the ride engages, and you fall, okay? But you only fall for about a second, and then this pressurized thing catches you, and you come to release. So your stomach, you get the thrill of the ride. You're falling, but not really, and you're caught. And then it throws you back up, and you're falling again, but not really. And you're laughing and having a good time, and it's taking your picture. And even sometimes, like if you had something in your hand, it would float for a little while, or your hat maybe comes off and comes right back down. It is a wild ride for just a few seconds. You're falling, but not really. I have a little game that I'm playing right now with Augie, and he is so much fun. He'll come into wherever I am. He'll look for me, Papa, Papa, and he'll pull me. He's, just starting to learn to talk and all that. He'll pull me and like follow me. He doesn't know how to say that, but I'll get up, and he made me the other day follow him all the way into my bedroom, okay? And he looks at the bed, he looks at me, and he goes, "More," which more in Augie's world, more means I want you to change something about my life right now. So it's him saying, I want you to do something. Well, we have this little game we play on the bed that I say, do you want to fall? And he didn't used to know what that means. And I put all the pillows out on the bed, and I held him by his legs, and I held him out, and I say, 1, 2, 3, and I dump him back, and he falls back on the pillows. And the first time it happened, he just kind of freaked out, like, what just happened? And he realized he was okay. And I picked him up. I said, let's do it again. And he was iffy. And then I dumped him, boom, and he started to smile, started to get the hang of it. Well, we've done this 4 or 5 times now. And now he wants to do it. He's like, Papa, come, and so he starts to go 1, 2, and on 3, he throws himself out of my arms and onto those pillows, because he's learned to enjoy, he's learned to delight in my way. Okay, now at first falling was a little scary, but he's learned that he's so secure with Papa that he can trust Papa, and he can trust the soft landing, and that I'm going to hold him and take care of him and not let him be in danger, and so he can take delight in the things that I'm doing for him. My friend, you are falling, but not really. You are vulnerable, but not really. You are grieving, but not really. You feel temporarily unsafe, but not really, okay? Because you are held, and you can take delight in God because He is delighting in you. And you can rest in that, and you can enjoy Him, even through uncertainty, because He is ordering your steps.